There is breaking news from the Wall Street Journal tonight that is a big story. It also looks like it may be the end of an era. There's a guy named Benjamin Wittes. He's not that familiar a face. He's not exactly a household name. For a long time, Ben Wittes covered the Justice Department as a reporter for the Legal Times. He's also written for conservative publications like the Weekly Standard. He's written for magazines like The Atlantic. He spent a long time at the Washington Post on the editorial page staff. But Ben Wittes is now at Brookings. I actually don't think he is a lawyer himself, but he is definitely known for his writing, for his very good writing, actually, on legal issues, particularly as legal issues pertain to national security. Ben Wittes now runs a well-regarded blog that's called Lawfare, which I think is kind of a pun on warfare. Lawfare, warfare. Anyway, it's at lawfareblog.com. So, Ben Wittes. On May 16th, this guy who I just described, Ben Wittes, he did this online, on Twitter, which is a weird thing, right? Nobody knew what was wrong with him. Nobody knew exactly what this was about. You can see the timestamp there right beneath the tick, 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 tick. He sent it at 3:18 p.m. on May 16th. Hey, Ben Wittes, what's that about? Well, then, later, boom. Literally, the word boom. 2 hours and 8 minutes after that initial tweet, we now know, in retrospect, what that tick, tick, ticking was about. Ben Wittes tweeted boom and a link to that huge story that had just been posted at the New York Times. Quote, Comey memo says Trump asked him to end Flynn investigation. That was a huge story when it broke. And apparently, somehow, Ben Wittes knew it was coming out because he tweeted tick, 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 tick 2 hours before it came out, and then boom, once it landed. That was May 16th. And then 2 days after that, Ben Wittes started ticking again. At 3:44 in the afternoon that day, he tweets the same thing again. Tick, 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 tick. And then sure enough, 4 hours later, boom. And what he sent out with the word boom was, once again, the New York Times posting another huge story. This time it was, Comey, unsettled by Trump, is said to have wanted him kept at a distance. That was May 18th. Then the very next day, May 19th, freaking Ben Wittes, you're stressing me out, he starts tick, tick, ticking again. And this time, the boom goes off twice in one day. The first boom is just 6 minutes after he published the tick, tick, tick. The New York Times reporting that Trump told Russian officials in the Oval Office that he fired James Comey in order to take the pressure off himself over Russia. That was the first boom that day after Ben Wittes tick, tick, ticking. And then 8 minutes after the first boom, a second boom. That bombshell Washington Post story. Russia probe reaches current White House official. The current White House official, a person of interest in the FBI's investigation. So Ben Wittes, I mean, I was aware of him because of his reporting, because of the Lawfare blog before this, but now he's become the guy who ticks. And he has continued to do this over and over again all through the first part of this year. On May 24th, he didn't just say tick, tick, tick. He used a video of a literal burning fuse and a tiny explosion. Instead of typing out tick, 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 he burned the fuse on a tiny cannon, and then boom, later that day, it was the New York Times again. Top Russian officials discussed how to influence Trump campaign staff last summer. And then a few minutes later, boom again for this CNN story that broke that night. Quote, Attorney General Jeff Sessions did not disclose Russia meetings in security clearance form. So Ben Wittes has been doing this over and over again. He has been doing this on scoops about the Russia scandal for weeks now. Here he was on June 6th. You see the text he's written there? Now, please don't read anything into this, but tick, 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 tick. And then again, 2.5 hours later, we got the boom. In that case, it was, Comey told Sessions, don't leave me alone with Trump. And that, of course, may be part of the obstruction of justice investigation into the president now. So, tick, tick, tick. Ben Wittes with these tick, 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 ahead of time, ahead of the scoop, and then boom, once the scoop comes out. he has become a very reliable provider of stress and anticipation when it comes to all of the next step, almost all of the big new developments in this scandal that has enveloped this young presidency. Every time something big is about to come out, there's Ben Wittes, tick, 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 tick. And within a matter of hours or some time later, it pays off every time. Tonight, though, Ben Wittes gave it up. He says he's going to stop doing it. Okay, folks, I am officially retiring the tick, tick, tick thing. It was an attempt to give people a heads up as things were in the pipeline. He says to everyone, it's stressed out. Apologies. He says he is retiring the tick, tick, tick. But I should tell you, he did get in one last one today. And this one, he actually started the fuse burning on it a few days ago. A few days ago, it was actually all caps. He said the all caps on the tick, tick, tick that time were in honor of the expected magnitude of the detonation. That was June 23rd, he ticked that. And then nothing happened that day. And then 3 days later, June 26th, which was Monday of this week, he kept it going. Tick, 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 tick. And a few minutes after that, he clarified. He says this, 3 things. Number 1, not all tick, tick, ticks are related to James Comey, who Ben Wittes is known to be friends with. Number 2, fuse length, meaning how long this thing is going to keep ticking, remains uncertain. So, aha, right? That's why it's been a few days that he's been ticking on this one. And then his third point there, he gives a hint. Interesting preemptive defense of collusion happening. So that was Ben Wittes, right? The harbinger of scoops. That was him at the beginning of this week, Monday this week. And now tonight we have finally got the boom. And frankly, it's what he says will be his final boom. He says he's no longer going to do these tick, 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 boom things. This is it. And the final one tonight is, in fact, a bombshell breaking news story about what he was hinting at, about what appears to be collusion or maybe an attempt at collusion. So for the final time on this tick, 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 boom stress cycle, this is the story Ben Wittes is linked to. This is what just broke tonight in the Wall Street Journal, and this is a big deal. You see the headline there, Republican operative sought Clinton emails from hackers. Now, the reporter on this story is veteran national security reporter Shane Harris. Shane Harris is going to join us live here in just a minute to talk about this scoop. What he's reporting here, though, is about something that took place last summer. You will remember that the Democratic Party had its email servers hacked and had its data stolen last year. It was not until the fall that we got an official declaration from our government that that hack was the product of a Russian government attack. But last summer, by late June, even though we didn't have official confirmation from the government, it was credibly being reported that that attack against the Democratic Party appeared to be an attack by the Russian government. And then by the end of the summer, by Labor Day, the Washington Post was able to report out this mega story on the Russian attack on the institutions of our election and U.S. government efforts to identify the attack and to counter the attack. Well, tonight, the Wall Street Journal reports, Shane Harris reports, that on that very weekend, on Labor Day weekend last year, a longtime Republican opposition research guy, a wealthy Chicago Republican named Peter Smith, who had a history in the Arkansas-based efforts to come up with scandalous dirt on Bill Clinton in the 90s. Peter Smith, a committed Republican oppo guy, over the Labor Day weekend this past year, according to the Wall Street Journal, he, quote, assembled a group of technology experts, lawyers, and a Russian-speaking investigator based in Europe to try to acquire emails that the group theorized might have been stolen from the private server that Hillary Clinton used as Secretary of State. So put yourself in the time frame here that we're talking about. This is Labor Day that he's trying to do, this Labor Day weekend. Now, by that point, right, by that time, there really had been Democratic emails stolen from the DNC. And we would later find out there were also emails stolen from Clinton's campaign chairman as well. Clinton's emails from that private server from her time as Secretary of State, that was a whole different matter. But Peter Smith and these people who he assembled, they apparently read the news that Democratic servers had been hacked by the Russians, and they extrapolated. They basically mounted an effort to try to get Hillary Clinton's private server emails off the Russians. because they thought they must have hacked those too. Quote, in an interview with the Journal, Mr. Smith said he and his colleagues found 5 groups of hackers who claimed to possess Hillary Clinton's deleted emails, including 2 groups he determined were Russians. Quote, we knew the people who had these were probably around the Russian government, said Mr. Smith. Okay, so he's out there to try to contact the Russian hackers, to try to get emails they might have stolen from Hillary Clinton. And he contacts 5 different groups of hackers. At least 2 of them he thinks are definitely Russians. Does he get anything from them? Interesting answer. Quoting from Shane Harris's piece tonight, quote, Mr. Smith said after vetting batches of emails offered to him by hacker groups last fall, he couldn't be sure enough of their authenticity to leak them himself. He tells the Journal, quote, we told all the groups to give them to WikiLeaks. Now, WikiLeaks did publish a bunch of Democratic stuff that was stolen by the Russian government, but this stuff, according to the Journal, quote, WikiLeaks never published those emails or claimed to have them. So this is a Republican operative convening a team to try to work with people who they expect and believe to be the Russian government to try to get from them what they hope are emails stolen from Hillary Clinton. And it seems clear that the reason they wanted to get them and tried to get them is because they wanted to use those Clinton emails here in the United States against Hillary Clinton. And I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb here to call that a literal example of colluding with the Russians in their attack on the United States, or at least trying to collude with them. You can see why Ben Wittes went boom on this today for his final boom. Now, important note here on this story. There is nothing that suggests that the guy who convened this group and hired the Russian speaker and all the rest, there's nothing to suggest that he was part of the Trump campaign, or that he was doing this on behalf of the Trump campaign. I mean, the Journal, as the Journal puts it, quote, this appears to have been an independent campaign by Mr. Smith. They actually put it right in the subhead of the article, independent of the Trump campaign. Nobody says Peter Smith was part of the Trump campaign when he did this with the Russians. So to the extent that what he did looks like it might have been an attempt to knowingly collude with the Russian government or with sources close to the Russian government while they were attacking our election, to the extent that that's what this is, that is on him and the other Americans who worked with him. That is not on the Trump campaign, except for one thing. According to multiple sources quoted in the Wall Street Journal tonight, this Republican operative, Peter Smith, he told people involved in this project in multiple ways and at multiple times that what he was doing, this little project he was working on to try to get these Clinton emails off the Russians, he told people over and over again that he was doing this with Mike Flynn, who definitely did work for the Trump campaign at the time. This was all happening around Labor Day. Mike Flynn had joined the Trump campaign months earlier. He was a senior advisor to the Trump campaign. Peter Smith, this Republican operative in Chicago, reportedly said he was in direct communication with Flynn about what he was doing while he was doing it. Quoting from the Journal tonight, quote, in conversations with members of his circle and with others he tried to recruit to help him, Mr. Smith implied he was working with retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, at the time a senior advisor to then candidate Donald Trump. He said, quote, I'm talking to Michael Flynn about this. If you find anything, can you let me know? That was said by Eric York, a computer security expert from Atlanta who did search hacker forums on Peter Smith's behalf, looking for people who might have access to the Clinton emails. Quote, in one Smith email reviewed by the Wall Street Journal, intended to entice outside experts to join his work, Smith offered to make introductions to Mike Flynn's son, who worked as chief of staff in his father's company. In another recruiting email seen by the Wall Street Journal, a law student Mr. Smith described as a close colleague included links to the websites and LinkedIn profiles of people purportedly working with Smith's team that was trying to contact the Russians. At the top of the list was the name and website of Flynn Intel, which is Mike Flynn's consulting group. In phone conversations, Peter Smith told a computer expert he was in direct contact with Mr. Flynn and his son. That's according to the expert, who is not named in this article. Now, Mike Flynn is not commenting to the Journal himself. The Trump campaign is trying to push this so far away from themselves that at this point they're dangling it out the window. This is the statement that Shane Harris got from the from the Trump campaign. Quote, a Trump campaign official said that Peter Smith did not work for the campaign, okay, and that if Mike Flynn coordinated with Smith in any way, it would have been in his capacity as a private individual, even though Flynn was a senior advisor to the Trump campaign at the time this was happening. Flynn was on board with the Trump campaign at the time this was happening. He was senior advisor to the Trump campaign at the time this was happening. He was soon to be designated as Trump's pick to be national security advisor. If he was working as part of this effort to contact the Russians to get what they had on Clinton, that's boom. And here's probably the most important part. This piece in the Wall Street Journal tonight is multiply sourced. It includes even an interview with the guy who reportedly set this thing up, Peter Smith. Although I should tell you, Shane Harris also reports that Peter Smith died 10 days after doing this Wall Street Journal interview in which he described what he did. In terms of corroborating this account, though, there's really big news on that front. Look at this. Quote, the operation Peter Smith described is consistent with information that has been examined by U.S. investigators probing Russian interference in the elections. According to U.S. officials with knowledge of the intelligence, quote, investigators have examined reports from intelligence agencies that describe Russian hackers discussing how to obtain emails from Mrs. Clinton's server and then transmit them to Mr. Flynn via an intermediary. In advance of this report tonight, Ben Wittes was ticking like you can't believe for days. And you know, conservative media and Republicans really did start to proactively say that colluding with the Russian attack, hey, maybe that's not such a big deal. In the last few days, conservative media, supporters of Mr. Trump, have started to say, if anybody did collude with the Russians in this attack, that's okay. That's not a big deal. We're not going to be upset about that if we learn that. Well, here's what appears to be the first concrete evidence of an attempt by Americans to collude with the Russians in their attack. Boom. Joining us now is Shane Harris, national security senior writer for the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Harris, congratulations on this tonight. I really appreciate you making time to help us through it.
Thanks, Rachel. Glad to be here.
Let me just ask you first if I got anything wrong in the way that I explained that.
No, you got it right.
Okay. I have to ask you first about a small but very human detail here, which is that Peter Smith, who did an interview for this story, he died in May, you say about 10 days after you spoke to him. Can I just ask you about the circumstances of the interview and the circumstances of his death and that part of it?
Sure. Well, oddly enough, Peter Smith actually reached out to me. He apparently learned that I was looking around and interested in him, which is true. My knowledge of what he was involved in predated my first contact with him, and reached out to me, and we had a conversation about what he was doing, which was fairly extensive, and obviously he's quoted in the story. And it was at that point that when we suspended that conversation that I continued doing reporting and assumed in this case, perhaps incorrectly, that I would have the chance to go back and discuss this further with Peter Smith, but obviously he died about 10 days after I spoke with him. So it was on the record. He reached out to me. He was in no way ashamed of what he had done. He was actually quite proud of it and fervently believed that these emails would eventually surface. He really believed that he was at the end, as he described it. He thought that he was at nearly the last chapter of a long saga, and that soon these emails would come to light and that he would ultimately be vindicated in this quest that he was on.
And from the way that you describe your interview with him, it seems clear that he was fully aware to the point where he engaged a Russian speaker as part of his efforts. He was fully aware that he was dealing with Russian hackers and explicitly told you that he believed that the people who he might be trying to reach here would be people who would be close to the Russian government. So he seems to have known that this was a Russian government attack and that he was trying to reach out to them to try to use what they'd been able to find here.
Yeah, that's right. And I think he concluded, and perhaps not illogically, I should say, that Secretary Clinton, being a former Secretary of State, Russians at the time, of course, were believed to have hacked the DNC, that he was likely to find a potential group of candidates of people who might have this information among Russian hackers. And it was a little bit cautious, I should say, in describing exactly who this investigator was that he had hired. But clearly he had a network of people working with him that he believed could make contact with folks who might have access to this information, and he set up a fairly elaborate process to try and vet it as well. But yes, he knew clearly when going into this that he was likely to run into Russian individuals claiming to have Hillary Clinton's emails.
Now, Shane, on the point of the connection to the Trump campaign, General Flynn did not respond to your request for comment. You noted in the piece, and Flynn has not commented publicly on this matter whatsoever. But if this is an example of people trying to contact the Russians to get what they have to use it here, that's obviously a very sensitive issue. If that can be linked directly to the Trump campaign, that's a matter of investigation. What you describe as being this effort by Mr. Smith, and what you describe as being in part of what U.S. investigators have seen who are looking into this, is it clear to you that U.S. investigators stumbled upon evidence or found evidence of what Smith was doing, and that's part of the potential collusion that they are investigating?
That's not entirely clear at this point.
Okay.
I think my best kind of assessment of this is that what we have found may be one end of something that other investigators are looking at. As we said in the piece, it's not entirely clear that investigators who've seen this intelligence about Russian hackers describing a situation looks very similar to the one that Peter Smith described. It's not clear that he has been identified in any way or anyone associated with him as the intermediary. So I think what we may have actually potentially found here, and we should say we do not know, is perhaps the other side of a coin that investigators were looking at. The time frames are very similar. The activities that are described in the intelligence reporting, as we understand it, are very similar to what Peter Smith described.
Shane Harris, senior writer on national security issues for the Wall Street Journal, sole byline on this major story tonight. Thank you for being with us here to help us understand it. I appreciate it. Congratulations.
Thanks for having me, Rachel. I appreciate it. All
right. Again, the Wall Street Journal tonight breaking this news that it's a fascinating story on a human level, but if this bears out, and the White House is not commenting and Mike Flynn is not commenting, but this appears to be the first clear reported connection between the Trump campaign in the form of Michael Flynn and the Russian attack, with this well-described, well-sourced effort by American Republican operatives looking to contact the Russians, who they knew were attacking the United States, to try to get stuff from them, get stuff from the Russians on Clinton that they could use here. If Flynn is implicated in that effort, that would seem to mean that the Trump campaign is implicated in working with the Russians, attempting to work with the Russians to further the aims of their attack in this country. It's a really big deal. Much more to come tonight. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.